y'all. I am Ivy Odom, a test kitchen professional in the Southern Living Test Kitchen, and this is What's Cooking with Southern Living. Today, we are making one of our most requested recipes, teas corn pudding. Let's get cooking. For Southerners, the holidays are our time to shine. We have trees that hit the ceiling, plenty of poinsettias, and magnolia garland that is enough to fill Santa's workshop. Not to mention all of our amazing recipes, from casseroles to beautiful cakes that grace our sideboards, and all of the recipes that we pass down from generation to generation that are our crowd pleasers. You name it, the holidays are where it's at in the South. Today, I have one of our most requested recipes that is always the star for any holiday table, and I am so excited to show y'all how to make it. Right off the bat, if you read the recipe, it will give you two options for baking: individual ramekins or a large 2-quart baking dish. If you ask me, for Thanksgiving or for Christmas, any of the holidays, individual servings are a lot of work. It's way easier, a lot more transportable to bake in a large baking dish than it is to bake in individual ones. So that's why I'm opting for a 2-quart baking souffle dish today. But you can definitely serve this in individual ramekins if you prefer. So this calls for a well-greased baking dish. You could use cooking spray, but butter is the classic way to do it. Keep some room temperature butter. It's great for toast. And then just get a paper towel and kind of rub it in all the nooks and crannies. You want the custard to be able to rise in the pan, and greasing it not only helps prevent it from sticking, but it also helps it rise because it doesn't stick to the side, so it helps it lift up in the hot oven. Now that my baking dish is well greased, I'm going to cut the kernels off of my corn. So this recipe calls for 6 cups of corn kernels. Way back in the day, corn was a lot smaller than it is now. So this recipe that is a little bit older calls for 12 ears, but I think about 8 ears is probably gonna get the job done. So however many cobs it takes you to get to that is how many you're gonna need. So what I like to do, grab by the silks from the very top and kind of divide it in half. And then you just kind of rip it down the side. Then, in order to get all of the silks off, I'm just using my hands. You could also use a toothbrush to get the silks off, but you do kind of want to get as many off as you can. I have a kitchen hack for cutting corn kernels off the cob, and it involves one of our very favorite Southern kitchen tools, the bundt pan. Perfect for resting an ear of corn, and all of the kernels will catch in this bundt pan. The original method for cutting corn involves milking the cobs, which this recipe does not call to do, but I might do it just because I really love the end result whenever you get that good corn milk. This part of the cob where you cut your kernels off, so you could take the backside, the broad blade of your knife, and kind of rub it down the side so you can see all of this. This is edible and so delicious and full of corn flavor, and adds some creaminess to your corn pudding. A little bit of corn pudding history. This recipe is so classic. It dates all the way back to even before the 1800s when hearth fire cooking was a thing. We didn't have proper ovens, and they still wanted to cook these amazing puddings and souffles and things that were super velvety and custard-like. What they would do was put their corn pudding in a baking dish and set that on a trivet inside of a Dutch oven. So that was the very first way that they kind of got around the direct heat method of cooking with coals. Now that all of my corn is cut off the cob, I'm going to set it to the side so that I can whisk together the rest of my ingredients. Whisk together flour, granulated sugar, baking powder, and salt. Whisk together your dry ingredients, set those off to the side. This recipe calls for 6 large eggs that we're going to whisk together with some heavy whipping cream and melted butter. And then we'll whisk in our dry ingredients and fold in our corn kernels. Crack your eggs first. You can see all of the yolks, and then you can use your whisk to break each one of the yolks up. Once you pour that heavy cream in there, it covers all of your eggs. So I like to lightly whip my eggs before I add in the rest of my ingredients. You want to whisk this up pretty well, so whisking your eggs with your cream and your melted butter, and then we're going to whisk in the dry ingredients that we had set off to the side. And then it's time to fold in the corn. Any sort of recipe that calls for folding in, I like to use a rubber spatula. Corn pudding, I think, is very, very similar to creamed corn, but it has a little bit more of a smoother, velvety, custard-like texture than creamed corn does. This is it. It's done. We are ready to put it into our baking dish. My oven is preheated to 350 degrees. The recipe calls for 30 minutes, but that's for the individual ramekins. This, I think, is gonna take a little bit longer. I'll check it at 30 minutes and then keep an eye on it for every 5 minutes after that. What I'm looking for is for it to be set on the edges and slightly jiggly in the center. The slightly jiggly in the center does not mean that it is not cooked. It's gonna continue cooking as it sits and as it cools. If you were to overcook it, it would be mushy and not really velvety and smooth and custard-like, and no one wants that in a corn pudding. The corn pudding's in the oven, which gives me a perfect time to check our What's Cooking Facebook group. Let's see what people have to say about T's corn pudding. Laura Gurley says SLT's corn pudding is the best. I agree. This is one of our most requested recipes for a reason. It reigns supreme over all of our other corn pudding recipes, and I agree that it is the best corn pudding recipe out there. Lisa replied to Laura's comment and said, Laura, I second that. Been making it for years, and it also freezes beautifully before baking. 100% agree. That is a pro tip. Before baking, if you want to freeze this, you can make 2 times the recipe, one to serve now and one to serve later. Instead of putting it in the baking dish, you would put it in a freezer safe container. Then when you're ready to use it, let it thaw completely and pour it into a well-greased baking dish and bake it as directed. Great way to save some time, especially if you want to get your Thanksgiving prep done ahead of time. That is a great tip. Okay, let's check on this corn pudding. I have a feeling it's probably going to be done. This is perfect, exactly what I'm looking for. The edges are set and golden brown. The center is not too golden, very jiggly in the center, which is what I'm looking for. I cannot wait to dig in. I love the edges. I like it. I'm an edge piece girl. I like the crispiness, but if you're more of a center person, I would go right for the center, but I kind of do love the edge. That's why I went for the edge. This corn pudding, what I love is it stays together, but it's also just so custardy and smooth whenever you eat it. And I always make this in peak corn season during the summer, but of course it is a classic holiday recipe too. Okay, let's dig in. It's custardy, it's velvety, but I love the crunch of the corn. The corn cooks, but it's still crispy, and it just kind of bursts in your mouth and has a big, huge corn flavor, and I'm just going back for more. This is so delicious. If you've never made T's corn pudding, you've got to give it a try.